Program with Labor frontbencher Richard Marles. First, though, on AM Agenda, the Immigration Minister Scott Morrison joining me this morning. Minister, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
On another issue, not the military issue, I suppose there is a related element to it in the transfer of Bay-class boats by Australia to Sri Lankan authorities to patrol Sri Lankan waters. Can you give us the detail of what's going on there?
Yeah, well, that was first announced by the Prime Minister last year when he was at Choggum, and yesterday we signed the deed for that transfer. One is already on its way, left Cairns the other week, and the other one will be there in July. So that's two Bay-class patrol vessels, which we're retiring from our fleet, replacing those with our much more advanced Cape-class, and they're already on the rollout now. We also transferred, in the process of transferring two such vessels to Malaysia as well. And what this is about is ensuring an onward presence, working with our regional partners to ensure that our region's borders are strong. Because when our region's borders are strong, Australia's borders are strong, and we mean that, and that's backed up by the commitment we've made with the transfer of these vessels.
When it comes to Sri Lanka, Human Rights Watch has listed concerns it has on abuses against groups including Hindus. Are you sure there aren't legitimate claims that could be made by those in Sri Lanka, and by providing these boats, we prevent them from those claims being made? Of course, Sri Lanka is an island nation.
Well, and India's about 30 kilometres away, and you can almost work there on high tide. The issue here is about ensuring that people don't take that dangerous voyage all the way to Australia. In Sri Lanka, the UNHCR is there, other international organisations are there, the IOM. There have been thousands of people being repatriated back into Sri Lanka over the last few years. It's many years since the Sri Lankan civil war ended now, and what we're seeing is, I think, is real progress. That's not to say it's perfect. That's not to say there aren't issues still to be addressed. Of course there are. But our government is ensuring we're engaging proactively and positively with Sri Lanka to progress these issues, but also ensure that they have the wherewithal to ensure the integrity of their borders, which ensures the integrity of our borders.
Last year, we actually saw the number of Sri Lankans become Australian citizens increase, according to figures that you released yesterday.
Yeah, in a speech I gave to the Joint Working Party yesterday between Australia and Sri Lanka, I noted that, but I also noted the large number, the thousands who are actually coming through legitimate migration pathways, skilled migration, family migration, and the suggestion that the only resort people have in Sri Lanka is to come illegally by sea is complete rubbish, because the figures just don't back that up. We have a legitimate migration program, and if people want to engage that legitimate migration program, then the evidence is there that if you've got a skill and you've got a basis to be able to come here legitimately, then that has been demonstrated to be possible.
The UNHCR has said that the turn-back policy of the government is breaking the Refugee Convention. James Lynch is the regional coordinator for the UNHCR. What do you say in response to that?
Well, I just completely disagree. I'm not surprised. They've always opposed our turn-back policy, but I'll tell you what Australia's national shame was when it comes to this issue. Almost 1,200 people dead at sea. That's the national shame. That's the regional shame. That's the shame that all of those who have had a part in advocating soft policies on Australia's borders have to take responsibility for. Now, in our first less than 6 months, we've been able to stem that tide. We haven't had a successful venture to Australia now in over 4 months. That is stopping the deaths at sea. It's stopping people being taken advantage of by people smugglers and getting, frankly, ripped off. Now, they're results that I think are not only good for Australia, but they're also good for the region, because we're seeing a drop-off in the inflow into Indonesia and the flow through Malaysia. Now, these are good results that are ensuring better outcomes in terms of regional border security and the integrity of our own immigration programs.
The UNHCR says that if every state acts on its own and decides they'll close the door, there'll be nowhere safe for people to go. That's their concern.
We're talking about secondary movement of people who are coming from halfway around the world. We're not talking about people just walking straight across one border. And the issue we've had with the UNHCR for many years as a coalition is the lack of action on secondary movement and people taking advantage of a convention that we were actually one of the first countries to sign up to. Now, I don't want to see the convention exploited by people smugglers, and the actions the Australian government has taken under the Abbott government has, I think, put paid to that. We just frankly weren't going to put up with that anymore, and we've taken the action. It's had the results we said it would have, and I think they're good results for Australia, our border security, and for the region.
I want to ask you about that vision that was obtained by Fairfax of the violence in the 24 hours leading up to the death of Reza Barati on Manus Island. Is that going to be considered by the relevant investigations, that that particular vision?
Any evidence, any information that people have in relation to these incidents, they should be providing directly to Mr Cornwall, to the PNG police authorities, because that's the appropriate place for those things to be considered. Now, those inquiries are continuing. I'm hopeful they will come to a conclusion soon, but I'm not about to rush the completion of those inquiries. Those making those inquiries need to run their course and have every opportunity to do that properly. Once the inquiry is completed and a report is available and it's been received by government and considered, then obviously it will be released. I've always said that. We'll follow exactly the same process that was followed for previous inquiries when Christmas Island burnt to the ground under the previous government, Villawood burnt to the ground, Nauru burnt to the ground, and frankly I find the opposition's wailing about this a bit hypocritical. I mean, they weren't releasing interim reports. In fact, on the Christmas Island and Villawood reports, we had to wait till after Parliament rose at the end of the year before that report was released.
I'll get to their criticism in a moment, but would you call on those investigating to look at this evidence?
First of all, I'd call on those who have the evidence to make it available.
Well, it was made public. It was on the Fairfax website.
We'd like to have the originals, and they should provide that, and we can have that available to our investigators and our reviewers. And I would say to anyone who has information of that nature, that's the place for it to be investigated. I want to get to the bottom of this. I want to make sure that we know exactly what happened. But we've already taken action. I mean, prior even to this event, we'd changed the contractors, we'd beefed up security, we'd put additional security in there. We were aware within a month of taking office that what we'd inherited in terms of the security situation at Manus Island was by no means adequate. And we moved to take action on that, and those incidents were terribly regrettable.
Are you worried, though, that those images, that report yesterday, seemed to suggest that there was little done to preserve evidence of the crime scene, that it was potentially compromised?
Well, again, that's all the subject of the inquiry, and I'll wait for the findings in the inquiry.
What about Labor saying that you should release the interim report?
Well, they never did that.
You've got it on your desk now.
With any of the reports they had on following exactly the same process that Labor followed when they were in government, and I find it hypocritical that they suggest a new process should be followed now. If they don't consider centres burning to the ground to be of sufficient serious enough nature to warrant their release, then frankly I think they're being very hypocritical. The report will be released when it's finalised, and that's our commitment. We've never strayed from that, and we want to get to the bottom of it and make sure that information is known.
They say you've dropped the ball on managing Manus, that the policy as set up under Labor was meant to see people processed and resettled, that they still don't know what's happening in that regard, so there's no surprise that tension is growing there. That was the argument from Richard Marles yesterday.
Well, the opposition shadow minister seems to be not aware of the facts. I was in Manus Island within about a week of becoming the minister. I've been there on any number of occasions. What we inherited from the previous government was a basket case in terms of the setup on Manus Island. The arrangements, the contracting, the security situation, even the resettlement arrangements, which were a blank sheet of paper, there was nothing there. There was no ball to pick up, let alone to do what the shadow minister has suggested. Now, we've been working through all of those issues. We're in monthly bilateral discussions now with PNG and Nauru, picking up on the early discussions. We're expecting the first round of decisions to come down this month, and that's what we're working to, both in Nauru and Manus Island. We're getting on with the job of fixing their mess, stopping the boats that were started under Labor, and reversing the terrible increases in costs that we saw under the previous government's failures.
One final question. You've said that there have been no successful boat arrivals. Obviously, that's been the case over well over 100 days now, but have any boats been leaving Indonesia? Well,
any boats that do try will find themselves faced with the exact same policies that all others who have tried and failed were faced with. We've been over 4 months now, Kieran. Under the same period last year, we had around 100 boats and over 6,000 people turn up in that exact same period of time under the previous government.
But are there any operations trying to get boats off?
What we have seen is a massive reduction, a devastation, if you like, of the people smugglers.
No, there's been none.
Well, I'm not going to go into the specifics of that, other than to say.
But why not? If it's been that successful, why don't you just say?
Anyone who thinks they can try to get to Australia will find themselves thwarted and frustrated at every turn, whether it's sea, on land or anywhere else. And I know that to be the case because that's been the success of our policies over the last more than 4.5 months. And the most successful policy of all those is turning boats where it's safe to do so.
But if they've shut down the operations and there are no efforts in Indonesia to try and get boat loads off. Why don't you just confirm
Because
that for me now?
you've got to be eternally vigilant. I'm not going to be so complacent to think that the threat ever goes away. The threat is there every day, and I'm going to make sure that that threat is never taken underestimated, and I'm going to ensure that we have the measures in place to ensure that that threat can be counted every single day.
Minister, thanks for your time.
Thanks a lot.
After the break.